This is the podcast between an old school mentor and a digital mentee on managing and/or working with people, navigating a career, growing profits, and not killing your coworkers along the way. Now let's join the consultant, Haydn Shaw, and the millennial who fixes Haydn's iPhone, Seth Tower Hurd.
I guess Skype only allows you to clap 3 times.
We're just going to keep that as the intro. This is the show about growing in marketing management and not killing your coworkers along the way in corporate, family business, or nonprofit settings. My name is Seth Tower Hurd, syndicated broadcaster, entrepreneur, and sometimes journalist. He's Haydn Shaw. He's helped over 30,000 managers at a whole bunch of companies you've heard of. We're going to be talking a little bit about...
a whole lot you've never heard of.
And a whole lot you've never heard of. We're going to be talking about why projects launch late. And everybody has some kind of project management type of a thing going on. I mean, even if I was trying to think if you could work without having to need some sort of project management skill. And I was like, well, maybe if you're a novelist, but no, that still has to get done in a certain time, and you still have to work with some people. So...
it's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm in National Speakers Association here in Chicago with a woman whose kind of niche is helping writers actually write. So she teaches project management skills, very highly customized project management skills to writers, because she puts out about 5 books a year, 5 novels a year.
Holy cow. Okay. As somebody who's, played in the journalism space quite a bit, I would say that there's a lot of quote-unquote professionals that could really use that skill. So, by the way, thanks to Haydn this week. I'm just going to lay this out there. I just had my second best month ever as a business owner. And then I told Haydn I was going to quit and that we were going to shut the podcast down because I was being insane for a moment of delirium of not sleeping for more than 4 hours for a week straight. And he was like, maybe we shouldn't do that. So we're not quitting. That's the announcement for this episode. We're not quitting. And I'm less crazy than I was 4 days ago. I was just like, I'm done. We need to stop doing this. It's stupid. Nobody cares, including all those thousands of people who listen every week. None of them care. This is dumb. I'm embarrassing myself.
Okay, well, I'm now officially changing the topic. There is no way we can introduce why projects fail with that kind of thing. All the listeners are like, really? I was starting to like this show, and it said this considered quitting. So now the topic, Seth, is how do you know when to quit and when not to quit?
Okay, and can we do projects next week then? Because that was a good intro. Is that okay?
Yeah,
our next episode?
Okay. So you can just cut the same intro and use it over again. It was a great intro, but yes, let's change topics after you switch gears like that, because my guess is there's some people like, all right, what's going on? And that's the best part about a podcast with 2 people is when it's human and not just about topics. And so that was a very human way to switch gears, which is I was going to quit, and I've had my second best month ever, and no, I'm not going to quit.
Well, I knew I had my second best month ever when I said I was quitting.
Also telling him he just needed sleep and he shouldn't quit.
Yes. She told me to eat, drink water, sleep, and I probably would feel like I wasn't going to die, which wound up being the case.
Yeah, so this is especially relevant for all the entrepreneurs out there who have times when they're like, why am I doing this? And it's especially prevalent, and then it has some real application for everybody who's got to make major life decisions. And so, how do you know when it's a good decision and when it's a bad decision? And everybody says, follow your heart, be true to yourself. And there are some times when you're not be true to yourself. It's it's just the sleeplessness, or an old joke. It's the wine talking. I don't really love you. It was just the wine talking. And so. So how do you know what's talking when you're trying to find your authentic self? There is a huge burden today on making decisions based on your authentic self.
Yes, I want to set up just a little bit more of this episode before we actually dive into the content. By the way, if there's 2 things I hate about 2018, it's the term self-care, because everybody who uses the term self-care actually doesn't work very hard, and therefore are the last people to need downtime. And then the whole live your truth thing. Facts are facts, and usually live your truth means that you just, ran off with somebody and left your kids and stole all your money from your business partner to make it happen, but it was your truth. And, you slashed and burned your way out of town and hurt 37 people, but it was your truth. So I hate those 2 terms.
Well, all right. And for those people who are listening to this going, I just used both of those sayings in the last 2 days. It really does tie to the idea of how do I make a decision about what I'm doing? Everybody ought to live their truth. The research shows that we're happier when we live our truth. The research shows 40% of us are lonely, and over half of us feel like we can't be our true selves at work. That is a huge challenge for businesses and organizations, and it's a key piece to engagement. And at the same time, Seth is exactly right. I've seen all kinds of behavior that is harmful and has classically been considered immoral. And people say, well, I need to live my truth. No, Rihanna, you need to get out of relationships with people who are abusive to you.
Yeah.
That's what you need to do.
Sorry. Yeah, and let me set up one more place I want to go before the plane lands at the end of this episode. I do want to talk about projects that somebody else believes is a good idea that you're stuck with, which can happen in family business corporations and nonprofits, where you're going, nobody thinks, this is nobody's decision but one leader's, and it's not going to work, and no matter what we do, it's not going to work, and that's just one of the worst places to be. But first, let's just talk through the actual decision making. I tend to be a pretty gut feeling kind of guy, and I know that as the company grows, I need to build a team around me of people who aren't like me, who are going to push back. Actually, a company we both worked with, I was doing video at yesterday, I loved what one of their managers said. They said that, we've been together for 10 years. We come in here and we fight like crazy sometimes, but we're all really different, and that's what's kept us on the straight and narrow. I love that decision-making process.
And to go back to our conflict session, if you didn't listen to the podcast on conflict styles, Seth is in classic Thomas Kilmann, a sturdy battler. So for Seth to actually get into the pool with and the shark is the metaphor animal of the sturdy battler. So to get into the pool with other people, but to be a reformed shark, kind of think of Dora, where you're not eating other fish. So you're not going to eat them, but you like a good rough and tumble. That makes complete sense. Like that decision-making style would appeal. And what it says is, nobody should trust their own true self until you've had enough time to find out if that really is your true self. And it makes sense in political reality. So if you haven't heard the podcast on politics, also that's kind of a shout out to that podcast, because it ties, finding your true self ties to politics, because we usually want to find our true self when we've had it up to here with politics. And,
by the way, he means office politics, not national politics. So that's two previous episodes. You didn't.
Thank you. Yes, office politics. I've just kind of blanked out real larger politics as a way of coping with reality.
Okay. So a lot of people are in situations where maybe if you're in a small to medium-sized company, you may not have a bunch of other managers or leaders to bounce things off of. You may have people below you, but I also think that a lot of times it's not helpful to, flesh things out or to get in the mud too much with the people you're actually leading or the people who report to you. So if you're the warehouse manager, I don't think you want to grab a guy off the forklift and say, okay, so here's what I'm thinking about the next quarter as far as sales go, and this is my concerns. And he's like, I just want to drive the forklift. I think it's weird when managers get insecure and pull people into conversations that they're not ready for and don't have the experience for yet. So let's first start with, if you feel lonely.
Bingo. I'm going to stop here, because It is the consultant and the millennial and generational stuff is what it's kind of a sub theme of this podcast. One of the things as a matter of fact, I was just with a Dairy Producers Association on Tuesday, and the afternoon session was on how do you succeed as a younger person in the dairy industry, which has, as you would imagine, a lot of people who've been doing it for 30 years and have a big old milk mustache all the time that they're required to perpetually wear. One of the bits of advice I had was the chain of command. And one of the big criticisms that older generations have is, a lot of times younger generations, the millennials, younger Xers, and now this new generation in the workplace I call connectors, they often violate the chain of command. The problem is managers can often violate the chain of command. The chain of command protects people, because the last thing I want to know is that my boss is having a moment.
Yeah.
Last thing I want to know, I always joke about, is the CEO comes along and goes, I got a board meeting. I'm supposed to have a vision. Do you have a vision handy? I haven't had time. I've been really busy. Those things scare the horses a lot. Yeah, General Grant doesn't believe we're going to win the Civil War, but now I'm going to go out to die. That was the biggest issue. Sorry, I've been reading a lot of Civil War history. That was the biggest issue the Union forces had for the first year and a half of the war, is that the troops didn't believe the generals were going to keep people from dying and unnecessarily. And so, yeah, all of that, Seth, is great stuff. So for people who are like, I don't get the chain of command, it protects people who underneath you from times when we're inappropriately sharing feelings or information that will scare them.
And by the way, just a reminder that no matter what kind of industry you're in, we just, as of this morning, hit 3.9% unemployment. If your people don't think you're going somewhere good now, if your people think you're hesitant, if your people think your company is in trouble, you're going to get down to just having your worst employees, because believe me, somebody else out there wants your best ones.
And I never do sales pitches on this thing. But if you're struggling with 3.9, and a lot of organizations are, it's going to be something that I can help your organization sort through. How do you find and keep the best people regardless of generation? And so I got a series of videos called How to Cut Your Generational Turnover in Half on peopledrivenresults.com. They're free, but now that it's 3.9, it really is a big deal. And most organizations are going to need help at what they do with that. Anyway, it's a great stat, Seth. So
let me throw in one more thing.
Why were you thinking about quitting, and why are you not going to quit?
Okay, let me throw in one more stat on you, because I got to pump you up a bit more. I do want to say that most of the clients that I work with, it costs them about $60,000 to recruit a white collar employee, and it's definitely cheaper to have Haydn come in and fix why they're leaving than to pay the recruitment costs. Headhunters are really expensive right now because everybody.
Well, and it's definitely cheaper. It's definitely cheaper to figure out if you need to let them go. So nobody is healthy if it only retains and never releases. And so many organizations I work with ought to release a few people, but they're worried about the cost of retention, and they need to worry about the cost of keeping people who are actually getting in the way of where they want to go next. So on both ends of things, it gets expensive and then even more expensive.
Okay, so why I wanted to quit. Actually, I think this is going to be a future episode different from this. So I am currently without health insurance because I went out on my own, and it's just been cheaper to pay the penalty than to have health insurance, because when you buy it self-employed, you basically still don't have health insurance unless something really bad happens, right? And so I don't have health insurance. If I had health insurance, I definitely would go to therapy for my feelings about the business, for my relationship with the business, as I'm figuring out how to be okay with that. And you might think that's crazy if you've never went out and worked for yourself, but there's just so much uncertainty. There's so many different ways you can go. And every decision that you make, even when you close a sale, when something great happens, it means you're not doing something else. And I eventually got it in my head that other people were able to keep all the balls in the air where I was dropping them. And then I hung out with one of my closest friends on Tuesday night. I impromptu drove back from Indianapolis from some client work, and he's fortunately the kind of guy where you can show up at 10 p.m., eat whatever's in his fridge, and stay up till 1 a.m. hanging out, and it's fine. And, he just told me straight up, he's like, I signed a lease on a new retail space, and the city that it's in jerked me around on getting the build out done. And now I'm in a situation where I'm paying $10,000 a month in rent on a business that isn't even there yet. And I was like, oh, well, I haven't made $10,000 mistakes yet. And the reason you make $10,000 mistakes is because the business has grown to the place where there's that much revenue to lose. And so that was really a big game changer for me. I had convinced myself that, I had certain weaknesses, and that they couldn't be overcome by delegating, outsourcing, stuff like that. And I was just like, so it was probably just going to kill me anyway. And I'm working 80 hours a week. And why am I working? And even though I can get my salary up to more than it was at a day job, why would I work 80 hours a week if this can't ever scale? If this can't really grow anywhere? Sure, I'm making more money, but I'm also working twice as much. So I'm making quite a bit less per hour. So why would I do this when I got a kid on the way and I'm exhausted all the time?
Friends, I just want to stop right here and say, Seth Tower Hurd has just summarized the entrepreneur's dilemma perfectly. I don't know that I could add anything to what he just said. So if a person's been an entrepreneur or gone out on their own, they are going to have eventually this crisis of faith. It's too dependent on me, but I don't have money to pay somebody else to do it. And then I get a bunch of work and then I delegate it out. But there's certain things, well, wait, this isn't working. And almost everybody knows their flaws. They know their weak sides. And so, but when they're a single entrepreneur, they're having to do the weak side part of the job all the time. And that takes a lot of time. And this part sucks.
It does. It does. And then what I realized was that I can quit at any time. I mean, if this truly just mentally breaks me, the economy's great. There's always another job. But if I'm close to getting to the next level, and this is like Monday, Tuesday, I'm just like, I told my wife multiple times I quit, and she's like, you don't quit. And she's like, you're not quitting right now. And I'm like, but I quit. And she's like, you just had your second best month. Why? And I was like, I know, but it's not going to get any better than this. And so I was ready to quit by Monday. Yesterday, I got one of the best leads I've had, and I basically closed another sale from somebody who called me off of a referral that I hadn't even talked to in years, which changes the whole trajectory of the business and how much outside help that I can bring in through freelancers to take pressure off of me so that I don't die, and also that I can go make more sales. So I was literally 72 hours away from everything changing. And I seriously, if I was single, I might have just deleted the website and said, I'm done. I'm going to finish out some client work for a couple months while I look for a job. I was that close. And that was total gut instinct because I lean really heavily on the gut instinct side.
Almost all creative people do. It was fascinating to me to work for Crown Golf 15 years ago. And I learned one of the metaphors I use all the time in training and in coaching. So back in those days, Michael Jordan was still playing for the Bulls, and I was sitting next to, on the bus to the Bulls game, I was sitting next to a guy who had played on the pro circuit. He still played for the U.S. Open in the, kind of in the older league. I forget what they call it.
Yeah, like PGA Masters League or something.
Yeah,
like that,
PGA Masters. He was one of the top 4 rated golf coaches in the country. So, people out he's retired now, but people out would go to Aspen. Movie stars, sports players would pay him to give them lessons. So I said, you have taught lessons to a lot of sports players. Can Michael Jordan retire from basketball and make it as a pro golf player? He said, not a chance. I said, why not? He said, it's how you get yourself into the game. He said, anybody who has, through their entire lifetime, developed incredible skills of pulling energy through their emotions can't contain that energy when they golf. He said, the way they contain the energy is they get themselves psyched up in a game, and then they burn it off by running harder, by playing better. They've got a place to burn the energy. He said, golf, you move your wrist to putt, and then you walk, and all you can do is think about how you just screwed up the last 3 shots. All that emotional energy that football players, basketball players use to get into, soccer players use to get into the game, kills you in baseball and golf because you don't have enough muscle movement to burn off the emotion. So if you get yourself to a different level through emotion, it will kill you in games that don't have a lot of physical energy, and you have to get yourself into by calming your brain. You calm your emotions in golf to play better. You rev your emotions to play better in basketball. And anybody who remembers Michael Jordan, he was classic. The Bulls would be losing to the Raptors, the worst team in the league, and somebody would insult him, and then he would go to a whole nother level and score 20 points in the next 10 minutes. And so he or they'd lose because he could never get himself revved up in the game. They'd lose to the worst team in the league because Michael Jordan never showed up because there wasn't any emotion in the game with it. And so people who are creative or people who get into the game through their emotions, and they're probably half the population does it that way. The challenge is they think their emotions are their true self. I got to live my truth. Well, your truth just changed 3 times because your truth was based on your emotions. And that's the most dangerous thing for people who get themselves into the game through emotions. Anyway, I'm done with that little tears, Seth.
No, I think that's legit. I think that wherever you're coming into that at, nobody wants to work for a hyper emotional leader that's up one day and down the next. And, you know, if that's your manager, I mean, your people are tiptoeing around you whether or not you realize it. So at some point, you just got to be the steady old school World War II sergeant who's just marching forward no matter what, you know, what the war throws at you, in my opinion.
Seth, I couldn't agree more on that. And I was even talking about a different thing as well, another angle to it, which is how you make decisions. If you're making decisions that are emotional and not just having mood swings, but if you're making decisions that seem emotional, at first people are going to be like, wow, what a brilliant person. They're so intuitive. They're so creative. And then after a while, they're going to go, I thought we just killed about 3,000 soldiers over in this battle, and now we're marching exactly to where we were 2 months ago. The people up there are lunatics and don't know what they're doing. And so they're making emotional decisions rather than rational decisions. And that will get you. Actually, emotional intelligence wise, we're talking now about what, you know, everybody thinks emotional intelligence is about your interpersonal skills, but we're really looking at what in emotional intelligence is called intrapersonal skills, how we deal with our own emotions and how we use them or don't use them well in moving forward. And in Seth's case, and we talked about it when we were talking about work-life balance, in Seth's case, when you're doing what it takes to just make the sales when you move your first year into a new business on your own, you know, you're working a huge number of hours. And work-life balance sounds great, but then you panic and you're like, all right, I'm just going to do a little more work. I'm just going to do a little more work. And so there are times when you just got to say, nope, I'm going to play video games for the next 7 hours, like you mentioned on that podcast. Or there are times when you're like, I'm just going to have a day when I don't work.
Yeah.
And the research shows that even no matter what state you are financially or in a new business, taking a day when you don't do anything makes you so much more productive the rest of the time that you lose money anytime you work 7 days a week.
That is one of the hardest things I've tried to stick to and have not always done a good job. Because it was always like, well, I'll just get a couple hours, I'll just get an hour, I'll get 3 hours, and 3 hours turns into 8 hours every time. Which is
and why is 3 hours turn into 8 hours? Why, when you haven't taken a day off in 2 weeks, does 3 hours turn into 8 hours?
Because I missed a free throw my senior year of high school. Let me unpack that. So I've always been pretty driven, valedictorian, full scholarship my first year of college, college sports, and also jammed a bunch of other things in there from, competitive speech to yearbook to, I pretty much thought you had to do all the stuff. And I took a bunch of classes because the guidance counselor pretty much threatened me that if I didn't have chemistry and pre-calc, nobody would ever want me in life for any job or college. All right. So I was actually dead on perfect for the first half of my senior year of high school basketball and free throws. So I hit all of them. Came back from Christmas break, probably just, a little bit of mechanics being off. I missed one, and then I missed like 25 in a row. And the story I told myself...
went from not missing a free throw to missing 25 free throws.
Yes. The story I told myself is, had I just shot a little more over the summer, where I was taking, 300-400 shots a day, well, if that just would have been 425 shots a day, I wouldn't have missed that shot. And now I have to live with this forever, because last summer I didn't do quite enough. And I think it's pretty foundational. My whole adult life, I've always thought, well, if I don't do this, then I will live in regret that I didn't do quite enough. And it actually works against me.
Oh, this makes so much sense. And sadly, this is where we're alike. I'm the kind of person who can get their performance up through emotion, and then it will burn me in 3 or 4 different ways. And one of them is to think that I just need to work a little more and then we'll get there. And once I work a little more, we'll get at the place where I don't have to work as much anymore. And that is the enemy of scaling. To go back to your earlier fear, this is unscalable. Well, it is, because when you think about it, if I got that next piece of business by working more, that means that the next time I'm in a hole, I got to get the next piece of business by working more. And then I'm in a hole again and then suddenly the logic of us kicks in and goes, oh, wait, I'm in a death loop here. The only way for me to ever, because I think in my mind, if I just do this extra work, I'll get to the place where I don't have to do this anymore. Life will get back to normal. But it's actually an irrational thought, because whatever I'm doing, it's not working. And the only way for me to make it work is to do more. Then I'm in a death loop. And so rationally, the rational part eventually catch up with our emotions and we go, wait, there's no way out of this. And so then we want to quit, because the rational part has now grabbed our emotions and thrown them down and said, you're done. You're in a loop here. And so we get rational enough to get it. And the only thought we have is to get out, because we know if we work harder, we can get there, but we worked as hard as we can and we don't want to do it anymore.
And I definitely, I bought into a couple myths that probably aren't completely true. One of them is the amount that my grandparents and a lot of the refugees from Laos that I grew up around worked. And my mom finally said to me, that your grandparents and great aunts and uncles were farmers, and some days it rained and they did nothing all day because there was nothing to do. It was pouring down rain. There was no way work could get done. She's like, you don't ever have that. There is no day where it's raining where you can't work because you're working indoors on a laptop or making sales calls or whatever. And the other thing was that I just heavily bought into the myths of Mark Cuban and Gary Vaynerchuk, who both claimed that basically they took like 5 days off in their whole 20s, and that's why they're super rich. And that's probably not true.
It is. That's not the reason they're rich. The reason they're rich is they came up with an idea that the market wanted, and they were able to sell enough to scale, and they were smart enough to get out of their own way when it was time to scale, but they still worked a huge number of hours in order to get there. And that's the age-old question. Can an artist, you came out of the music industry, can an artist be amazing without being mentally ill or wildly dysfunctional? Or is the Van Gogh, the mentally ill artist, really Van Gogh's a bad example because he killed himself. But is the artist with the emotional problems? Hemingway, he was an example of self-actualization. Even in high school psychology class, I was like, didn't he shoot himself? I don't want to be self-actualized. Back me off one notch of full self-actualization if you shoot yourself when you hit it. Anyway, so the kind of the bottom line with this is this big debate on could those two guys have made it if they hadn't have worked those hours? I would argue for sure they just got themselves. You can watch Mark Cuban on Shark Tank. He gets excited with the product, or he's not. When he's in his reflective mode, but when you can tell when he's willing to offer a lot more money because his whole face lights up. Mark Cuban gets into the game through his emotions. And you can watch him with the Mavericks more than any place else. He gets himself charged up and has no place to go when he's mad or happy with the Mavericks, and then he says stuff that gets him penalized.
And also he gets onto the court. I mean, he's the only owner, I think, in the history of the NBA that walks out on the court and screams at the refs, which has cost him a lot of money in his career.
But he gets himself in the game, he gets himself in emotionally and then doesn't have any place to go with emotion. People who get themselves motivated emotionally will then work ghastly number of hours. And you listen to Gary Vaynerchuk, and crushing it is even an emotional thing.
Crushing it.
You get a book called The E-Myth, revised edition, and the E-Myth is all about being a thinking person's way to scale. Now, it works great for franchises, and it works great for replicable businesses, and it would have some things that would really apply to your business. But the E-Myth is like, let's break this down into processes and think this through. And so you get a guy like Jeff Walker who teaches people how to do online courses. Everything Jeff Walker does is about scale this, here's a process, do this next. And so he's really kind of a mellow guy. And even when he's all charged up, so I've seen his events live, even when Jeff Walker's all charged up, he's still pretty mellow for a charged guy. Even admits, I put on dance music up front because I want to get everybody charged up because I'm I can be kind of mellow. And even when he dances, he just dances in kind of a dorky old man way. And he even admits it. And so that's his kind of approach to it. So those two guys were probably great examples, but most of us are attracted to the charismatic kind of leader who tends to get themselves in the game emotionally rather than the kind of logical, more thoughtful kind of leader who doesn't necessarily get themselves in the game emotionally, but thinks it through a little more. Both are valid. You got to figure out your decision-making style and approach and not let emotions take it away from you.
This is sort of like the conflict episode and the politics episode in that we can't give you the listicle at the end of steps 1 through 7 on how to course correct for where you're at on the spectrum. You just have to be aware of what here to here is and where you're at on the scale, and be ready to think about where your weaknesses are at. Let's go out on 2 questions because we're. Well, no,
let me give you 3 things that a person needs to know.
Oh, you do have a list.
So
okay.
Let me give you some steppy stuff then. First, you got to know where you are on that spectrum. Secondly, when you're tired or have alcohol, this is a bad time to make a major life decision. And so most people just need more sleep. And then they need to make sense of it. If you're religious, the best way to get rest and reflection is to be involved in religious activities. Now, there's a huge amount of research around this. One of the things that mindfulness training has done in businesses, mindfulness is a really hot thing. One of the things that mindfulness training has done is the kind of, it's brought business the same kind of mental, neurological impact that slowing down and reflective meditative prayer does. So if you're religious, and I know some of the people who listen to this podcast are, because Seth and I both are, then you need just to slow down. You need to get into organized religious practices. Organized religion is one of the absolute best stress reducers that's been identified in the research. It calms mental illness. It causes smoking cessation. It keeps people from making rash decisions. So literally, organized religious worship is one of government research discovered it's one of the best things you can do to make better decisions. How's that for crazy? And doing something, if you're not in organized religion, doing something specifically spiritual that calms all that down is a major impact. Then, if you're an entrepreneurial person, you've got to get a team around you so that you don't. So Seth called me. He goes, I'm going to quit. Let's give this 2 more months and I'm going to quit. I knew he was just tired because he's doing a side hustle while he builds his business. And because the man is a farmer, if he can keep doing his side hustle a little more, he starts hitting numbers that people who are supposed to be doing the side hustle full time get to hit, but he can't help himself. So he has to hit the bonus numbers. And so he's working too many hours. 4 hours sleep makes everybody dumb. And so I knew that I just needed to give him a chance to listen to his wife and slow down. You got to have a team around you. Nobody can be entrepreneurial without a team of people who will talk to. So Seth talks to me. I call him. We chat. Then they close down my stupid exit. Hey, if you're the state of Illinois and you're Illinois Department of Transportation, give a little heads up and just put a little detour route when you close down the entrance to a major interstate when I have a flight to catch. I'm still bitter. Okay. So I said, Seth, love you, man, but I got to figure out how I'm going to not miss my plane, which this week I took the last one out. And, of course, I know better because you never know what crazy things are going to happen. So I was like, oh, I'm not here to talk to. And so it's great. Seth finds a friend. The friend goes, dude, I'm paying $10,000 a month because I got screwed. Oh, it happens to everybody. You begin to chill out. You go get some sleep. Day a week.
Okay. Last 2 questions. So that's really good stuff. Number 1, I can think of an organization right now that I believe you've said they are so analytical that they're going to make sure they go out of business exactly according to plan.
Sorry, I turned the ringer off on my home phone.
Okay. No, actually, it wasn't you that said that. That was there was a book called Predictable Success that does the stages of business, and the last one's called like the death cough, the death spiral, and it's when you've got the bean counters, and hey, I need a bean counter I need more
That's
bean
what
counter
you
in my
need. That's the other
what I
side
need.
of
Yes,
it.
but when it's all that, you have a business that's going out of business exactly according to plan. They're going to follow their exact schedule until they shut their doors. And I actually think of a couple businesses like this where I'm like, my gosh, you guys. I mean, how can you not see that not taking any risks and not having a little bit of daring is what's going to kill you, and you're just dying slowly year over year. How do those people get to be a little bit more like me?
Oh yeah, because that's what you see more often when you get out of entrepreneurs and into corporate. Entrepreneurs, by definition, have to absorb a huge amount of risk and keep going. Corporations exist to minimize risk.
Yeah.
Therefore, when a person comes along suggesting risky things, once again, back to your question earlier of what about a project that your boss loves that everybody else thinks is dumb, corporations have 1,000 ways for employees to put on the brakes and to stop a project they think is dumb. And sometimes that's a good thing because an entrepreneur will go out of business if they have a dumb idea. I was just talking to a guy, they started a kind of a LinkedIn for a different part of the world, and the Great Recession hit and half of them went out of business. It was a bad idea. Looking back on it, you can see, we got into the dot-com boom. It was a bad idea. So in other words, if you're an entrepreneur and you take on a huge amount of risk and it's a bad idea, how many people get into the game like Gary Vaynerchuk and Mark Cuban, but had bad ideas or bad execution and aren't Gary Vaynerchuk and aren't Mark Cuban? There are far more of those that failed than they did. So the point of it is, large corporations try to protect against creative people who just have a gut feel, but don't have a good business strategy. Problem is, you get a bunch of analytical people who get themselves into the game by thoughtfulness, and they need another chart, and they need another study, and they need another consultant. And I love it what a mentor of mine said. They're always preparing to prepare. They're getting prepared to prepare. And those are the people in our political episode or office politics episode that make people crazy. Because our current president could not be accused of preparing to prepare. Our current president is an entrepreneur who makes decisions based on his gut in an atmosphere that scares all your allies. So whatever you think of his politics, pro or con, his style is definitely entrepreneur and driven from emotions. And so as somebody in his inner circle said, the president's much like the weather. If you don't like it, give it a couple of days because it'll change. And so he's got his own challenges of working in the most bureaucratic organization in the world while trying to run it as an emotionally based entrepreneur who uses Twitter to go directly to the population. It is such a shock to the system for that and other world governments that he's earned himself the spot at the bottom of the ratings of presidents just because of his style and compatibilities. And so it's a great example of what happens when you get somebody whose style is so different than the system they're working in. Whether you like his politics or not, I'm not making a partisan statement. I'm simply describing the style selections that motivate our current president. The last one was such a contrast. People often go, "Oh, I miss Obama." Like read a best-selling book by somebody who used to run the CIA, and it's I miss Obama so much, and it's basically I miss his style, I miss his thoughtfulness, I miss the rational way we play golf and we make decisions, as opposed to the basketball way we get ourselves charged up and make decisions. And so, point of it is, large corporations, they need to make a space for some people, and they only do best with intrapreneurs, not entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are able to answer the questions thinking people need and still push entrepreneurially for new ideas. And many organizations just run those folks out because they just get tired of fighting the battles.
Yes, I would say yes to all those things.
So it's entrepreneur, not entrepreneur, inside of organizations.
Yeah, and I could add some more here. I'm not going to because I don't want to torch some relationships. Because I actually listened somewhat. I listened somewhat to you on the last couple episodes, and also I've already torched one major relationship in the last 7 days, so that's probably enough. A business relationship. Let's go out on.
But you didn't do it on purpose. That was you. You did not torch it intentionally. it's one of those things that happens as you go about your day and somebody didn't like something you did.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would say that that's actually a win, even though I think from the outside, when that particular project wraps up, people are going to think it's a loss. I count it as a pretty huge win. Let's go out on.
But you're not a Flay slayer. I wore this because this barbecue place beat Bobby Flay. So I'm just celebrating on a Friday, good barbecue, and the Flay slayer. Who knew that it would be the appropriate topic for today?
By the way, Haydn and I are going to have our first meetup sometime in the next couple of months. We're going to do a live podcast episode, do some Q&A out in the southwest suburbs. At Wooden Paddle Pizza, which is something that we both love. So when they're open, we're going to be doing that probably on a Friday. We're going to be locking that down. But eventually we may have to do some kind of live podcast episode somewhere at a barbecue restaurant because we're both such big fans. But seriously, if you're out in the burbs or you're in the city, you'll do a little networking. Very curious to see. We have so many different kinds of people to listen to podcasts, and a lot of them are national audience, but we got a fair number of people around here, so I'm curious to see what goes down on this thing. We'll let you know when we got a date. Can we close on this topic? You work for somebody that's either way too emotional or way too analytical, and you are handed a project that this is probably also going to get into the next episode of why projects launch late. You're handed a project that is doomed. Or at least has a very unlikely chance of succeeding. How do you approach that person knowing that they're either, pretty emotional or pretty analytical?
Sir, I'm not even going to answer it. We'll do that in the next episode. That is because that's why half of all projects that fail because the project had no hope for a bunch of different reasons. And no hope. It may have been a good idea, but that project had no hope. And so you got to first know if that project has hope. And if it doesn't, there's a couple of different options you have in the real world. What a great question about how do you make things work in the real world rather than the world of theory. And that'll be a great one to work on in the next episode.
Okay, we will be back next week. Just as we wrap this thing up, you might notice the Consultant and the Millennial is growing, along with some other podcasts that I'm involved in. And podcasting is one of those things that my company does. If you want help to get a proven plan.
He does it really well. I show up and he runs everything else, and he does it really well, I will say.
I can get you from rough concept to 10,000 downloads in the first 3 months on a proven plan. Your people you need to reach are not always going to sit down and read Twitter. They're not always going to sit down and read a blog. Webinars are getting tougher and tougher to do because it requires people to be live at a specific time. What you want is to be able to reach the people you need to reach when they're in the car, when they're throwing some laundry in the washing machine, when they don't have to focus all of their time on you, and that's where ideas and concepts and sales happen. You can go to digitalprofitfarm.com and click on the podcast section to get rolling right there. And voice has never gone away. It used to be radio, TV, newspaper. Now it's YouTube, podcast, blogging. It's always going to be video, voice, and text, and probably the podcast thing is the hardest one for you to start without help. PeopleDrivenResults.com, by the way, is Haydn's website, and DigitalProfitFarm.com is mine. We've raised several questions here that we each love to help you with. And just as a closing note, the Consultant and the Millennial, you can search that and get into the Facebook group and grow alongside like-minded people that are trying to do the same kind of stuff you are. This is the podcast. Man, that was a bad line, but there we go. We're out. I'm going to hang up.